Hey, it's cold and a bit wet here in Britain in 2 weeks ago land. But you may remember that a while back I took a ride on one of these and I really liked it. And I wanted to do more of a long term test. So here it is. And as you can see, I've already ridden it a little bit, not very much. I took it out for one day yesterday because I didn't know if the not horrendous weather was going to hold. But I've not really ridden it very much yet, and I just wanted to do like a quick video just to go over sort of things that have come up while I've been researching this bike. Few just bits and pieces, maybe a little bit of electric bike trivia that I've run across, and yeah, not really any riding in this video, just bits and pieces that I've come across. Yeah, if you have any comments that I don't address in this video or that I hadn't addressed previously in my other video, do feel free to drop them down below and I'll see if I can answer them. Alright, so it's got about the same peak power as a speed triple or a 210 V4. So they're up around, I think it's 165 and 170. This is 169. That's obviously horsepower. Now, as the battery state of charge decreases, you do get a bit less power. So it does have a continuous power rating, which is a number that I don't fully understand. But it's a continuous power rating of 140 something, which is kind of in line with the old model speed triple. And that's a number you can reasonably expect to get on a random state of charge, but obviously if you're up sort of in the 90s, you're going to get more close to sort of 169, 170. Now, torque-wise, obviously it's an electric bike, and as we all know, electric bikes have loads of torque. So this is 215 Newton meters, which is as much as like a Rocket 3, I think, is 225. So it's kind of that kind of torque level, and you can really feel it. Like when you roll on, there's a lot of power there. Of course, on the flip side, it does weigh 260 kilos. That's what fully loaded GS, I guess, something like that. So it's quite hefty. I do know, like a speed triple or a 210 V4, which are very, very similar bikes to this in many ways. They're done around 215-ish kilos, so this is quite a bit heavier. But all of that mass is generally like here, and this is the battery. This is the heavy bit. This is the motor. It's not so heavy, and in here there's power electronics, the inverter and all that. They do have a width, but it's not like huge like the battery. The battery really is the heavy bit. I think at this stage I could do a whole video about why like all of your preconceptions about range and electric motorcycles are wrong. But I'm going to spare you that lecture, and I'm just going to give you the numbers the manufacturer quotes. I think it would be nice to spend some time with the bike and get a more realistic view of what its real world performance is, but these are the numbers the manufacturer quotes. So it's 123 miles ex-urban, 152 miles combined, and 261 miles city, which is if you think about it like an inversion of how a petrol works. Those numbers are pretty irrelevant to the real world, like to what you're going to experience on the bike itself. There's lots of complex reasons why that is the case. I'm not saying that they're wrong. I'm just saying that, like, a top to tail charge cycle, as you would do on a petrol bike with petrol, is not really how you are meant to approach battery management with these bikes. But that said, obviously on the test ride that I did, I was out for like 2.5 hours and I didn't need to charge. And that can generally be the case. Like, if depends on what speed you're going, what kind of roads you're on, how hard you're riding it. You could be out all day and never need to charge, especially if you're doing a lot of urban riding. And from my ride the other day, yeah, I charged a couple of times, but it was never really a problem. So there you go. The range is actually not as bad as you might think. Even if you look at the raw numbers and you're like, nah. One thing you might have heard is that in the cold they do very badly, and I can say from some experience that when it is heckin' Baltic out, you are going to suffer a drop in range. That's just physics, really. The battery does not perform at its best when it is cold. But it's not like catastrophic loss of range. Like I did find the other day, and yeah, well, to be honest, I was maybe going a little bit faster than whatever X-Urban counts as anyway. So yeah, my experience is if it's cold, you're gonna get a little less range. And also, if you take it out on the motorway, obviously that X-Urban range number is more like driving around at, say, 60 miles an hour rather than 70 or 75 or 80 or whatever it is your local motorway speed regulations are. You're going to get less range there. I guess maybe like 100 or so would be the number, but I don't really have any firm data to back that up. That's something I would maybe like to find out. You can DC fast charge rapid chargers using a CCS connector here onto the seat. It does up to 25 kilowatts. 25 kilowatts is the fastest you're going to get for an e-moto. But also it has the biggest battery of any e-moto out there, so that kind of negates a little bit of the speed, but you're gonna get 20 to 80% in about 40 minutes. That's the quoted time. Yeah, the charging that I've done does seem to sort of correspond with that. It sounds very slow. It's not really. I stopped up for a charge the other day, plugged it in, went to the loo, and bought a cup of tea. And by the time I'd done that, it was ready, and I hadn't even drunk my tea yet. So that's not such a big deal. The charge rate in general EV terms is actually quite slow. But then in general EV terms, like a 21.5 kilowatt hour battery is pretty small. So it's not, totally out of line. The big advance, I think, that's going to come with battery bikes is not going to be bigger batteries. It's going to be active cooling of the battery itself. This battery could absolutely do way more. It could do 50, 75, maybe even 100 kilowatts of charging, but because it doesn't have active thermal management, that's not really possible. And active thermal management is, of course, heavy and bulky. It does, of course, have very slow AC charging. AC charging requires onboard equipment that is bulky and heavy. So consequently, they've gone with a big like DC push, and then they've given it enough AC, which is just this plug, AC capacity to do the most you can get out of a standard one standard 13 amp 240 volt socket. I got this with it. And what that allows you to do is just like plug it into a wall socket in your garage or wherever, and just charge it. Now, that charging is going to be slow. It's going to be about 6 hours from 20 to 80 rather than like 40 minutes, which sounds like glacially slow. But this is designed for overnight charging, right? So you come back from your ride, you park it in the garage, you plug it in, and then you go to bed. And also for battery management, so you can't balance the battery cells in DC, but you can do it on AC by just leaving it in plugged in overnight. And balancing the battery cells is how you maintain your capacity over time. So that's a very actually important function. And you might not realize this, and it might sound ludicrous that the 6-hour charge time is the one that you might actually end up using the most and being the most useful. But that's actually true, because if I just drive this within one like full charges range of my house and back, then I don't need to DC charge it. I can just charge it out of the wall socket. And the wall socket is cheap. All of the chargers I used yesterday were 45p per kilowatt, whereas my wall socket is 20p per kilowatt. So that's cheap. And also, it's really handy because although it's 6 hours, it's 6 hours when you're sleeping. So if you pull up to a hotel or a campsite while you're on tour, and you can just plug this in, like say if you're a campsite and you are just like, well, I'll have a caravan berth please, and you just plug it into like the caravan's power socket, you can charge up your EV. And when you start in the morning, it's fresh and charged, and you don't have to go find a charger for it. Just like when you're at home, if you charge it overnight every night, it's always going to be available to you. So that is actually remarkably handy in ways that you might not have thought of. Okay, this bike is in almost every respect faster than my VFR. The VFR does 4.4 seconds to 60. This thing is like 2.6 seconds. That's crazy. You know, the VFR does 140 something, and yeah, okay, this only does about 126, but it's governed to 126. That's an electronic nanny that says you can't go any faster. And without that governor, it'll go on past 155. But like, when it comes to top speed, who cares? I'm not going to do 126 on like the regular roads. I guess on a track maybe, but I'm not going to take this to a track. And even on a track, like hitting 126 and more, how often are you going to do that? You know, how boring is that track? So, yeah, it can go fast, can accelerate very fast. And on the subject of acceleration, it just does it. You twist the throttle and it goes. There's no spooling up. There's no gears. Well, there's one gear, but it's always on. There's no being in the wrong part of the rev range. There's no being in the wrong gear. There's no building up the revs to get your power. You just turn this, and the bike gives you power. And it does have a slight ramp up. There's a little bit of a smoothness to it, just because if it just gave you power, it would yank your arms off. But it's been tuned very nicely to deliver that power with like this tiny little bit of a ramp up, but it is just there. And it's hard to explain that to someone who's never ridden an EV. You should go out and ride an EV, they're brilliant. But yeah, it's really good. It's I guess it's just a very different experience to riding it than the VFR. Like the VFR it's not got as much power as this, but it does have power and it does go and it is fast and it is fun. But just the way that this delivers power is so much different. And yeah, it's not short of it. Plus, engine braking. So the VFR is pretty good at engine braking. It's a V4. But this thing, I just keep regen turned on to max all the time, and if you want to slow down, it slows down. Like you basically just ride it with one control. You just use the throttle, and it's a really nice way to ride. Like that's how you should ride a bike. Which isn't to say that the brakes are bad. I have unfortunately had cause to use these brakes, and I can confirm that they work very well. But yeah, like whether it's in the real world or on the spec sheet, like this bike is fast. So one place, like there is one concession they'll give on performance, and that's touring. So when it comes to touring, the VFR is going to be faster. It just is. And there's no way around that. I think we all know that that's the case. But a VFR, you just go everywhere at like 90 or 100 miles an hour. Does it absolutely flawlessly, beautiful. This thing, the harder you go, the worse your range is going to be. I know that seems like the most intuitive thing in the world, but it's a lot less prominent on my VFR than it is on this. The VFR will deliver broadly the same fuel economy at 100 miles an hour as it will at 75. But yeah, so the harder you go in these, the range really does drop off. It is actually dramatic. And now you have to adopt a different sort of touring strategy. You kind of want to choose different roads. You're obviously going to take your breaks at different places. You're going to plan to spend more time on the road. And there are some people for whom that's just unconscionable. I can't be having that. And then there are other people who are like, yeah, okay, you know, it's different, but we can deal with it. I kind of feel like I fall into the second camp, even though I do, you know, I do maybe press on a little hard in the VFR in general. But it's an area that I actually wanted to explore with this bike, and it's a bit cold for doing it at the moment. But I would like to take one of these bikes on a tour and see how well it does. That's kind of what I was aiming to do yesterday. I did about 220 miles just to see, and I didn't have to stop that much. And I didn't really worry about range actually that much either, because inevitably you plan to go a certain speed and you don't end up going that speed because you're stuck behind a truck or something. Oh yeah, park assist mode. Park assist mode is brilliant, right? It's absolutely great. Like, not only can you go backwards, right, but you can also go forwards very slowly. That's about as best it does. But like, it's really, I mean, I know it probably sounds idiotic, but like it is actually really handy, especially reverse. But it does actually have a lot of power. Even though it doesn't go very fast, it does actually have a lot of power. Obviously, it takes a lot of getting used to. I wouldn't want to like put my feet up while reversing unless I'd really, really practiced it. But it does have a fair bit of power when it's doing that. The other day, when I was out, like I parked at a charger, and because the cable was a bit short, I had to park like across the space, and there was a curb right in front of me, and naturally there was a second space beside me, sort of behind the bike, and someone parked there to charge off the other unit. So I had to mount the curb, and I mounted it in park assist, and it just went right up. So it's got a limit on how fast it can go, but it does have like a fair bit of torque behind it. Park assist can do a fair bit. I know someone asked me about that. Could you mount a curb using reverse mode? And my answer is yes, if you were brave enough. Okay, so there are a bunch of options you can get for this bike. You can get Öhlins shocks. Obviously, this is the standard Marzocchi Bitubo combo. You get various carbon fiber bits. This bike doesn't have any of those. They don't really save a lot of weight, but if you like the carbon fiber look, I guess it's pretty good. There's a set of Oz forged wheels. These are not them. These are the standard ones. But they have very spindly spokes. They're quite light, but they're also very expensive. I guess if you like that sort of thing, maybe it's worth paying for to you. This bike also has some accessories. It's got the heated grips. These are standard heated grips that you can get. It's got this screen, so these soft bags. This is a splash plate, which, as you can see, has really done its job. So it's kind of more of a comfort setup. But the selection is quite low. So you basically got whatever Energica have available. I think this actually has most of the options on it. And there's really not much that's available aftermarket. Just because it's a low volume bike, they don't really make and sell a lot of these. And that's a shame because it's a really good bike. But, you know, it's expensive, so what do you expect? But I guess maybe there are some generic bits and pieces that'll probably fit on it, even if they don't fit quite well, or maybe they're not very aesthetically pleasing. I know the dealer has been trying to work with a manufacturer in the UK, so that the dealer that I got this from, they are actually the Energica UK distributor. So they've been trying to work with a UK manufacturer to essentially supply some bikes to them so that they can size up a few of their parts and do some kind of deal through the UK distributor. But there's just not a lot of parts available. I think the only third-party parts that I saw that are specifically for these bikes are, there's a bar raiser that you can get, and if you have the Ego, which is like the fully furred sports version, it has clip-ons, and you can get like little helied clip-ons for it. I know there's a Dutch importer. They had some kind of deal going where you could get different luggage for it, but I think that was like an order that you had to be in on. I don't think that's something you can just buy, which is unfortunate. So generally speaking, you get what you get. You have the options that you get from Energica, and you just have to make do with it. But, you know, that's what you get with a rare bike. There are a few kind of glaring emissions, like mushrooms or frame sliders, whatever you want to call them. I have them on the VFR. I guess you can maybe get generic ones, but I don't know where you'd fit them. Like you couldn't put one there because your leg's going to be there. Maybe in these fairing mounts, that's what the VFR uses. It uses the fairing mounting points. Yeah, like this is an expensive bike. It'd be a shame to like drop it and like fuck it up because it's very expensive, and for the cost of like what 20, 30, 50 quid for like some big lumps of milled aluminium that you've stuck onto the end of it, or like sacrificial rubber, you might ruin your bike that you spent a very large amount of money on. So there is that. It's not great, but I guess, you know, over time, as they see greater adoption, because I think their sales numbers are rising. Certainly in the UK, EV sales are rising. We might see more options for bikes like these, and that'd be nice. The luggage options are kind of lame. These are Givi ST604s with some Energica branding on them. But literally, you could just buy these off the shelf. The frame that they go onto is it's also made by Givi. It's a multi-lock Sport T, I think. It's hard to fault Energica for the lame luggage options. This is basically it. I think you can get a tank bag for it as well. But I mean, their choice, I guess, is not great. Like if you're gonna have one option, why get these? Maybe it's because they're Italian and it's sunny there all the time and they don't really care that it's soft, and they don't ever foresee anyone carrying lots of stuff. But you do have to carry some extra cables if you're going on tour. So, you know, why not put a monolock frame on there? You can get a large selection of monolock stuff, or at least you used to be able to anyway, including smaller bags, and you can get hard cases for them, because normally when I tour with the VFR, I tour with like two big hard cases, and hard cases are better when it comes to rain, but also better when it comes to people walking up your bike and just stealing all the stuff inside. Top box, yeah. So everywhere I go, I have a top box on the VFR because it's just really handy. It's just there, you just open it, you put stuff in, you can lock it. It fits a helmet. I think Energica are just like, well, you know, the tank bag fits a helmet. It's like, yeah, but they don't have to carry it with me. Whereas I could just lock my helmet in the top box. Done. So yeah, if I had to live with this, I would miss my top box, I guess. Other things that I think kind of missing, wind deflectors. This has heated grips. The heated grips work. They're perfectly fine when you're standing still. If you're in the city, you know, they're all right. But my VFR, this is the shape. I don't know if you can see it from here. It's got these little things that stick out a little bit at the side. They would be kind of here, I guess. These are sort of like that, but they're not big enough. And what it does is it pushes the wind away from your hands. And that means that the heated grips in the VFR work very well. But the heated grips in this bike, basically, you put your hand in it, if you squeeze really hard, you can maybe get a little heat out of it. But there's so much cold wind hitting your hand that they're basically useless. Don't ask me how I know that. But I think you can get generic ones that'll probably fit on that. I know they're very adventure dad kind of things, but if you've got cold hands and you want to ride, it sucks. Especially because you need those hands to control the bike. It's very important, and cold hands are very bad for controlling bikes. Again, don't ask me how I know that. But I think that would be a big improvement. Other things that no one else cares about. It's only got a side stand. It looks like there's plenty of space to put a center stand in. I know center stands are heavy. And there's a lot of people out there going like, oh, center stand. But like, the VFR has one. And it's really handy because although it's got little thingies for a paddock stand, you can put up in the paddock stand and do your chain maintenance there. You're not going to bring your paddock stand on tour, are you? Where you're going to strap your paddock stand to your luggage. And chains. This is not a screed against chains. I love chains. But they do require maintenance. And you do have to clean them and oil them and so on and so forth. Is that? Yeah, it looks like that grease stuff. I'm not a big fan of greases. I prefer oils. This is because I live in sunny England. Center stand would be a good addition if you're giving this thing like tall windscreen and luggage and stuff to a lot of people to do a bit of touring on it. And you should probably put a center stand on there. Oh yeah, almost forgot because it doesn't really fit in anywhere. Dash navigation. It would be really great if my dash could tell me where I was supposed to be going, because one of the problems I have is, if you've seen any of my POVs, you'll note that I don't mount my phone to the yoke of the VFR because my phone has a chip in it, so it's not waterproof, and also the VFR is quite vibey, and it's not good for the phone. A lot of modern phones will be damaged by vibration in the bike. What that means is my navigation's in my pocket. And if you've been watching the channel, you will know that I like to yell at Google. Part of the reason for that is Google assumes I can see the screen and know what it's alluding to when it makes weird commands. So it would be really, really useful to be able to see like a little bit here of Google, or I guess other navigation is available, to just tell you where you're supposed to go. There are other bikes that do that. Cars all do it basically these days. There's no Android Auto or Apple CarPlay here. There are some bikes that do that. And I think that this is a expensive premium motorcycle, and that is becoming something that people expect from expensive premium motorcycles. I think the biggest complaint that people have about these is that there's no exhaust noise. Like as if the only thing that mattered about a motorcycle was its exhaust. And I don't think you're bad for wanting that. But I just don't view it as essential to the motorcycle experience. The visceral experience of riding a motorcycle is very different with these. but like it's not bad. I really enjoyed it. I mean, if you remember in my initial review, I said that I really liked how smooth it was, and it's true. It is really beautifully smooth. I love that about it. Um, and yeah, like I don't see that not having the exhaust note is all that important. And I don't get it. Someone explain to me why the exhaust note is so important. Like, at the end of the day, sure, it's quiet, but it is a bike. It's it's very substantial, actually. Um, it goes, it stops, it goes around corners. It feels good. It gives you all of the rushes that you want to have. And I don't understand why none of that stuff matters to people. Another common complaint is about the other side of the bike. I don't know why I started on that side for this, but people complain it doesn't have gears. There's no clutch, there's no gears. How am I supposed to ride it? And I think maybe people confuse this with like an Autobox. I've driven plenty of Autoboxes. In cars, I prefer an Autobox, but on bikes, I've always preferred gears. Because yeah, why would you have an Autobox on a bike, right? But here's the thing: this doesn't have an Autobox. It has one gear, and that gear is always engaged. And that's basically it. You don't have to change gears, there's only one of them. There's no torque converter, there's no clutch, because the gear is always engaged. You don't need that shit. And I think that's what confuses people. But like, yeah, you come up to a roundabout or a turnout or whatever, and you're slowing down, and you're like, oh my god, I need to be in a different gear. I need to switch down, and then there's no gears. You don't need to switch down. It takes your brain a second to catch up, but like, it doesn't matter where in the motor's revolution range you are, what speed you're going, what the road conditions are. If you twist that throttle, you've got power. Right? If you hold the throttle steady, you've got whatever power you were already asking for. There is no being caught out of gear. There's only one gear. There is no, do I need to be at the right rev range? The rev range entirely depends on what speed you're going. That's like ultimately what the story with this bike is. Yeah, it doesn't have a clutch and it doesn't have gears, and like I enjoy bashing up and down to the gears, sure. That might be important to your visceral experience. And I get that. But this is just a different way to ride. And you shouldn't be fearful of that. Because this isn't going to be like one of those weird old slush boxes where you ask it for power and it's like, oh, which gear do I need to be in to give you this power? No, it's just like, there it is. Power. It's not like some weird old automatic where you slow down to come into a roundabout or whatever, and then you ask it for more power to go around the roundabout, and it's like, whoa, I was still in fifth. No, there's only one gear. There's no trying to figure out what gear to give you. It's just, it has the gear. It's always engaged. It's done. That's the way it works. I think it's wrong to think of it as being like one of those weird old slush boxes, because that's not the way it's set up to be. And I think people have this idea that it's like some lame eco thing that's gonna come and take your fun away. It's a weird, dumb, macho concept, but I I think a lot of people do have that opinion, and it's not. But it's loads of fun. I've really enjoyed riding it. Um, there are downsides, sure, but it is fun. You should try one. It's great. They're really good. I think part of this problem is just that, um, like most of the people, I guess, who are watching this will never have seen one of these in the wild. I certainly hadn't until I went to an English Electric to try one out back in October. You've probably never seen an electric motorbike in the wild, but they are good. They are good. You should try one. Are they good for the environment? I don't know. Honestly. I don't know what the carbon output or lithium mining effects of producing this battery was and how it relates to like a regular petrol bike. But what I can tell you is none of the emissions from this bike are produced here in Rugby. All of the emissions this bike outputs are produced somewhere else, probably up at Drax in Nottingham. But right here in Rugby, there's no emissions from this bike. That's not so important for Rugby, but if you live in, say, London or like Los Angeles or something, that might be very important because the air quality in the cities is rubbish. And this thing doesn't produce any emissions there. And actually, you're not going to produce a whole lot of brick dust either because you're not going to be using your bricks very much. That much I can tell you. So, in terms of the physical environment that you live in, this is better for that. But I don't think that it's important to sell electric bikes on their environmental credentials. Ultimately, when it comes to cars, that's not what's driving people to get them. What's driving people to get them is they're good. What's driving people to get them is internal combustion engines are dying. Like they really are. I'm sorry if that's sad news. I guess it is. I like internal combustion engines. But just look at all of the bikes that are available now. Like, emissions are becoming stricter and stricter and stricter. And chasing those emissions regs is causing manufacturers to make their bikes worse and worse and worse. But emissions regs have been getting tighter and tighter. And as a result, engines have been getting bigger and bigger in order to deliver the same thing. And some types of bike have gone to the wall simply because of emissions regs. You know, do you like 600 Super Sports? Well, there's a reason they died. You just can't get that kind of power from that kind of engine and meet emissions regs. The VFR died because of emissions regs. It's gone. And that's basically that, right? There's nowhere to go for internal combustion from here. And that's why electric is really going to be the future. And it's a good future. These are good bikes. You just need to accept that times are changing and you need to move with them, really. Don't know what else to say about that. But when it comes to cars, it's really very simple. People aren't buying cars because they want to be green. People aren't buying like electric cars because they want to be cool. People are buying electric cars because the electric cars are better. And ultimately bikes are, e-motos are going to win on the same terms. They will win not by being greener or by the government saying that you have to buy one. They're going to win because they're going to be better. Because Like, petrol bikes don't have anywhere to go from here. It is really hard to construct any kind of economic argument for why you should buy this bike. Basically impossible, to be honest. It's very expensive. Um, Not wildly expensive. Like, it's not like weird exotic expensive. Harley will sell you much more expensive bikes than this. Ducati will sell you much more expensive bikes than this. It's nowhere near like Arch or that kind of level. I guess like its nearest competition would be like Hypernakeds. Like a Aprilia Tuono is about 60% the cost of this. A Ducati Street Fighter, the V4, that's about 80% the cost of this. So it's not wildly out of tune, but you know, the Street Fighter is a very expensive bike. So, you know, this ain't cheap. And while charging it up is absolutely dirt cheap, even if you pay absolutely no attention to how to save money on doing that, because there are definitely different ways to save money on charging it up, even in terms of like finding different charging networks that might be located in the same area. It doesn't matter. Even if you go for the expensive ones, you're gonna save ludicrous amounts of money. Like I looked at one of these versus a Tuono V4, and you're saving like 100 quid to 150 quid per 1,000 miles just on the cost of like fuel versus electricity. So in terms of running costs, yeah, it's cheap, but it's so expensive it just blows it out of the water. And the same goes for a lot of other stuff. So the servicing's pretty cheap. There's not very much to go wrong on it. This model does have some coolant and a little bit of oil in it, so you know it's got a service interval, but the service interval's longish, and it's not very expensive service. You know, there's no Desmo valves in this bike. Also, like at least here in the UK, the tax is free. You do have to pay it, but it's free. Work that one out. But yeah, just, the cost of buying the bike is very high. The warranty is 2 years. It's actually 3 years for the battery itself. I think the battery is rated to 1,000 cycles, but 1,000 cycles is a lot of cycles. But there are people out there who have done like way more miles than you're ever going to do on one of these. There's a guy who's had an Ego for I think 2 years. He's done 30,000 kilometers. That's like 18,000 miles. Your average motorcycle owner probably thinks they do a lot more miles than that, but they don't. They really don't. Like this thing I bought, 14 years old with 25,000 miles in it. It's not very much. So, yeah, like those guys don't really have many issues with them at all, which would seem to indicate that they're pretty reliable. Yeah. Insurance is pretty crazy though. I did have a call around to see what kind of rates I could get one of these, and uh, yeah, because they're really, really rare, and they're really quite expensive, and they're very powerful. Um, you can expect that the insurance will be very expensive. Um, Now, my experience of insurance, of course, is with a 18-year-old bike that's barely worth 2 grand. Um, so compared to that, it's hugely expensive simply just on the value of the bike itself. You may have to face a number of restrictions. For instance, I would have to have this garaged at home if I wanted to insure it basically at all. I did have one quote that I got for like £8,600, which is rather hilarious. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know how these numbers will compare to your jurisdiction, but in the UK, here in the UK, if I wanted to insure one of these, it'd be like £2,000. And I'm guessing that, that's. I've never actually tried to check what it would be for something like a 210 or a Street Fighter, but I'm guessing that they're cheaper than that. Even if not so dramatically cheaper as the VFR is. But that accident I had in Austria doesn't help. And yeah, like, the cost of insurance is so high that it probably wipes out all of the other savings that you make. Which means that those don't really contribute to making to reducing the cost of purchasing the bike. Which is lame, but that's the world that we live in. And until, I guess, people start buying more of these, thus driving economies of scale, and until battery tech becomes cheaper, I think that's just the world that we live in. One silver lining is that, according to the dealer, they hold their value very well. It's very hard to substantiate that claim because they don't come up for sale very often. I have set a search on AutoTrader just to catch any that do come up for sale, so I can have a see how correct that is. But that's been up for a couple of months now, and there's not been any hits. But if true, that it would allow you to recoup some of your costs, and certainly when it comes to cars, like, you could buy an EV, drive it for a year, and sell it for more than you bought it for. The market for electric cars is crazy. But I don't know that this applies to bikes, because there is a lot more demand for electric cars than supply can match. And the same is not entirely true of bikes. But that might be something to consider when you are looking at financing one of these, is what the finance company thinks its value at the end of that period will be. But yeah, I mean, as far as the dealers are concerned, if you bought one of these and you kept it for 3 years, they reckon you would probably sell it for roughly the price of an equivalent petrol bike brand new. So that's about 50 to 60% of its value. And that's, to be honest, for what it is and how expensive it is, that's not too bad. That's not too bad at all. But ultimately, I don't think you should be comparing this to the price of a petrol bike. I think that's the wrong way to look at it. I think the way to look at it is, does it suit my needs? right? Is this the bike for you, right? Basically, and if it does, can you afford it? Forget what else you could get. Can you afford it? And if the answer to both of those is true, then you should get one. It's that simple. So, this is the Energica Ava Ribelle RS. There are many like it, but this one is mine. Not to devalue that mic drop or anything, but don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit that bell, maybe watch some of my other videos. Leave a comment if you want to, and if 13,000 of you would like to click the coffee link, that would be really handy about now.